This is the third Humanitas lecture by Pierre Rosenberg on Poussin in England. And Humanitas Visiting Professorship, as you may know, or as you may not know, were created by Lord Weidenfeld, and they are now managed and funded by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and coordinated by CRASSH. And in fact, the Humanitas lecture in Visiting Professorship in History of Art was also made possible by the generous support of Mr. Jackie Safra. And of course, I would like to thank them all today, especially their representatives, which are present in this lecture. It is, as you know, the third lecture. We heard the first one. They were Cambridge-based lectures, if I may say so, because they were focusing, the lectures were focusing, the first one on, of course, Rebecca on the Well, of which we have a masterpiece, and of course the Seven Sacraments, of which the Fitzwilliam Museum acquired another one. Now, this enormous interest of Poussin in England, which, well, you will tell us everything about it.
Everything is, of course, very much exaggerated because, in fact, one should write three books should be written on the matter. First, the pictures by Poussin which were in England and which are in England, the ones who left England and so on. That would be a book. The second book could be about the English writers, the English painters, the English art historian interested in Poussin. That would be also a big book to be done. And the third book, the most difficult one, I will of course try to mention it, but without any proof of, without any success, I think, is why is Poussin so much beloved in England. In fact, I thought myself to give as title to this lecture, Is Poussin an English Painter? But I hesitated, and at the end, why did I not choose this title? It's for a very simple reason, because I could have also mentioned the lecture, Why is Claude an English Painter? Because, so not being able to choose between the two titles, I decided to call the lecture Poussin et l'Angleterre, Poussin and England. Well, I mean, it's, as I said before, a huge subject. And of course, as you know better than I, the numbers of pictures kept in England and how they arrived in England is quite impressive in a certain way, and from very early beginnings. The discovery, the rediscovery of Poussin also is a sort of English phenomenon. And of course, what I would like to say immediately is that we'll be speaking only today about pictures, and one could also, of course, speak about the taste of England for Poussin's drawings in a certain way. David's Grace here could not contradict me on this point of view. So I will only be speaking about drawings, and of course I will just present you 2 or 3 drawings of English collections, which have this marvelous English provenance, Sir Peter Lely in this case, but you know, of course, Sir Thomas Lawrence and many others collected Poussin in a very good way. This drawing is by chance in Louvre, but comes from the Sir Thomas Lawrence collection. So I mean, as I said before, I will be speaking of pictures, but the same could be done about Poussin and drawings in England. I will begin my lecture by a quote coming from Mariette. I will say it in French. Les tableaux de Poussin sont devenus très rares en France. Poussin's pictures are very rare in France. The quotation is of the 18th century, and it comes from the Abecedario written around the middle of the 18th century. Les Anglois, you mean les Anglais, nous en ayant dépouillés. The English people have brought them all to England. So Mariette said this about a picture he himself owned, and which is here, which is now in the National Gallery, which was given to the National Gallery in 1831, given by Lord Cholmondeley. And this picture, of course, was kept was in the collection of Mariette, sold in the sale of Mariette in 775, and entered in England at this moment. And of course, Mariette was right in saying les Anglais, les Anglois, nous en ayant dépouillé, because his own picture went to England immediately after his death. If I'm presenting this picture, it's for another reason. As you know, this picture we know 2 versions of the picture, this one and the Louvre one. I'm showing you both this one and the Louvre one. And for many, many years, the French scholars were, of course, accepting the Louvre picture and refusing the London picture, and the English scholars were accepting the English picture and refusing the... And now, of course, I don't think even that everyone, of course, accept both pictures, because... but why was... the discussion was, of course, a little bit chauvinistic on both sides, but why was this discussion also so strong between the scholars for a long time? It's because for a long time one did not understand something which is very crucial and which will be, I think, which we now begin to understand, which is not completely understood. We know perfectly well that Poussin hated to repeat himself. Spoke of this about the sacrament. He did another set of sacrament completely different from the one. But we know also now that before 1630, more or less, Poussin, at reverse, repeated this picture very often. And he did twice the same composition with variation or without variation. And in a certain way, I'm now convinced that between 1624 and 1630, Poussin painted as many pictures than he painted for the rest of his life. He painted a lot of pictures, too many pictures perhaps, too quickly many pictures. He did not had understood until 1680, 38, 39 that his greatness was a certain size of picture, and that his greatness was also a certain speed to paint the picture. So he's a slow painter. His speed is very special. He's able to paint 2 or 3 pictures, the maximum per year. Before 1630, painted too many pictures, and you have, I think so, in this case, 2 good examples of these early pictures, a very erotic picture in a certain way, painted too quickly, not the greatest pictures of Poussin, clearly, but both, of course, perfectly genuine. Having said so, and I think now everyone is convinced both pictures are right, the solutions are not, all the solutions are not found, because still now there are a lot of discussion to know which of the 2 pictures is the first. Is it the National Gallery picture? Is it the Louvre picture? And also there, so you mean each time you have made a progress in a certain direction, still a problem remains. Of course, I have my ideas about which one was painted the first, but I will not tell it to you. It's not, I mean, well, let us say something more about this. For many years, the problem of chronology was absolutely crucial in the studies about Poussin. The chronology was a part of a huge discussion, especially between Blunt and Maunov, we will see later on, but also many more scholars. Chronology was a crucial discussion. And in fact, in the case of Poussin, chronology is important, because, I mean, a picture by Poussin has another meaning if it's painted in 35 or if it's painted in 55. His mind, his ideas, his conception about what pictures should be is not the same. And his conception about human being inside of a picture, this conception about nature and the importance of nature is also quite different. So in a way, dating a picture of Poussin means also understanding a picture of Poussin. If you are wrong with the date by Poussin, that means you have not understood something about it. That's a parenthesis in what I was planning to say. In the case of the 2 pictures, of course, this chronology problem is less important, because we are at a moment where the ideas connected with the pictures are not as important as they became quite later on. By the way, as I said before, the Mariette picture bought by England and entered the National Gallery at the beginning of the 19th century was copied by a great friend of mine, Gabriel de Saint-Aubin, who copied it in the sale catalogue. And you see these are the little drawings, which in many cases, are helping me today for the identification of some pictures. The drawings by Saint-Aubin are very precise. He made many copies in margin of the sale catalogues he went through in the 18th century, and these drawings are very precise, and they're not looking as precise as you could think, but they are very precise and very helpful on the point of view of chronology. Having said so, I have to go back, but not to go back, I have to speak about what is a very crucial article written by Ellis Waterhouse. Is he from Cambridge? I don't know. Ellis wrote in 1960 a very famous article called Poussin et l'Angleterre until 744, which is a very important article, and more or less the first and the last great article written on this major question of Poussin in England. And he published an inventory from 1637, very early, were Lord Basil Fielding, who will become later second Earl of Denhigh, who was your ambassador in Venice, negotiated the acquisition of quite a number of pictures for the Marquis of Hamilton, and among these pictures was un quadro d'Amorini di Musu Poussino, a picture of little children by Musi Poussino. And of course, for Ellis Waterhouse, this was this picture, that I will show you which picture he thought was the one who came to England, was the first Poussin who came to England. In fact, the negotiations, this Ellis Waterhouse did not succeed, and the picture did not arrive to England. In fact, there was a negotiation. Hamilton did not accept the price. There was a big discussion. In any case, the discussion did not succeed. I should mention that the expert of the sale, and you will see why I'm mentioning it, was a great painter, Niccolo Ranieri, who lived in Venice and who was more or less a go-between for the acquisition. I have a picture of Niccolo Ranieri on the screen, a picture which is in the French Provincial Museum. And of course, this picture has another interest. Niccolo Ranieri was known for the beauty of his daughters. And as you see, this could be, I'm not so sure, one of the daughters. She's very well looking, and looks as the picture was in a certain time even called Sir Thomas Lawrence, strangely enough. In any case, you see that the daughters of Niccolo Ranieri should be looking very nice, looking very beautifully, and in any case, she looks very nice. And I mean, one of the daughters, in fact, I'm not sure it's this one, of course not, married another Venetian painter, Pietro della Vecchia, who was a great faussaire, falsery. In any case, for Ellis Waterhouse, the picture who did not come to England, at the reverse of what he says, was this picture, who is now kept, as you see here, in Wilton House. And he thought that was the first Poussin who came to England. That was, and this is in a way what is still written in our days. I mean, I'm a great admirer of Humphrey Wine, and his catalogue of the French 17th century pictures of the National Gallery is a real masterpiece. In his introduction, he still maintains that this is the first Poussin who entered in England, which entered in England. Of course, it's a very weak picture, and of course, worse than all, as you see, it's a fragment, a copied fragment. You see it on the left, of course, very clearly, of the very famous picture of the National Gallery in London, a picture which I could have shown at the end of my lecture also, because, well, it's a quite erotic picture, and I will go back a little moment about this picture. In any case, you see that the Wilton House picture, which is in England in the 18th century, is first a very weak picture, secondly a copy after Poussin, and that in any case, the idea that this picture would be the first Poussin who have entered England is a little bit, I mean, it's wrong first, but a little bit. In any case, what is the first picture who entered in England? I worked a little bit on this question, and well, my next slide is not exactly what I thought it would be. Seeing it here. Yeah. I will go back. The first picture who entered in England is this picture. This picture is the Quadro d'Amorini, which was in Venice in 637, and which remained in Venice until 659, where it was in the collection of Count Giovanni Paolo Widman. He owned the picture in 1659, and very soon after, the picture passed to France and was engraved. It's said by, after Poussin, it's said by Avis, but this is a problem which has to remain a little bit open. It's not absolutely sure. I'm going back to the picture. And the picture was after in many French collections. It was in the collection of Denis Moreau, who was premier valet de la Chambre du Duc de Bourgogne, and after went to another collector, François Nier, Marquis of Gambet, Randeau de Boissé, and entered in England in the 18th century. It was in England, was bought by the Earl of Grosvenor and sold by the Duke of Westminster, still the same family, of course, as you know better than I, the 4th of July 1924, for 700 guineas, and was bought by Colnaghi in favor of the Lisbon Museum. So this is the first Poussin who entered England in the 17th century. And of course, it goes very well together with the Quadro da Morini, and in a certain way, this is little progress about our knowledge about what entered into England. I'm going back. So my slide is not very good. It's of course important also to be sure that such a picture existed in 1639 on the point of view of the chronology. My slide, as I said, is not very good. The picture has been recently cleaned. I think I have not seen it in the last years, and I think the quality is quite obvious also from this reproduction. I should add immediately, of course, that the Lisbon picture is not accepted by Blunt, is not accepted by Doris Wilde, is not accepted by Thuillier. Someone has pronounced the name of Pierre Mignard about this picture. I don't remember who. I think Doris Wilde said it was Pierre Mignard. Of course, I mean, everything proves that we are in front of not absolutely, but a very charming picture with these boys playing with butterflies. I have to go back. Yeah. The second great moment, in a certain way, of the introduction of of Poussin's picture in England was the sale of Banqueting House, 1684, a sale which is not always very well known, but very important. You have here the catalogue, which I think is not a very frequent catalogue to see. And in this sale, you had 4 pictures called Poussin, a Madonna and 2 figures, Mount Parnassus, a bacchanal, and a landscape, and a 5th picture, and this is quite interesting, a woman and 2 satyrs, Manor of Nicolas Poussin, Manor of Nicolas Poussin. Before showing you some of the pictures of the Banqueting House sale of 1684, I'm presenting you another catalogue, which is some years later, 791, the catalogue of an English collector, Sir James Palmer, and of the Cardinal Barberini. It means the 2 quite very important sales of the end of the 17th century, in a moment where catalogue sales were not existing in France, beginning to exist in Holland, and really catalogues of a great importance, in a certain way, on the point of view of well, of course, of what they're saying in a certain way. I will go back to the sale of this catalogue. Well, so you see the pictures. The pictures there are not always easy to identify. A bacchanal, for instance, remains a very the title you cannot decide what it was exactly. A landscape, neither. You can be a little bit more interested in the fact of a Madonna and 2 figures, and I have to go. Yeah. This could be the Madonna with 2 figures, but of course it's very difficult to be sure. In any case, the Madonnas with 2 figures are not so often. Poussin painted a lot of Madonnas, but with 2 figures quite rare. So this is a pure suggestion. I'm not at all saying that this is absolutely sure. More interesting, of course, is the woman and 2 satyrs, Manor of Nicolas Poussin. Manor of Nicolas Poussin in 1684 proves that in so early as in 1684, specialists, people writing catalogues, were able to recognize a Poussin from a picture coming from his studio. It's very early for such a distinction, and proves that the knowledge was quite great about what Poussin was able to do. I think that this picture, this woman and 2 satyrs in Manor of Nicolas Poussin could have been a copy of the very famous picture in Ottawa, whose title we know now precisely. Well, the caption of my illustration is wrong. We know now that the subject of the picture is Vertumnus and Pomona, the very precise and very convincing article published quite recently by Anne Sutherland Harris about the identification of the subject. In any case, and of course we know perfectly well that the last picture, the 3rd one, or not the second one of the list, but the 3rd one I will present to you, is a very famous and absolutely marvelous picture. The very famous Apollo and the Muses from the Prado, who went from England later on in the collection through Holland, through this dealer, Jacques Meyers, which I mentioned in a present lecture. The picture went from England through Holland to the court of Philip V in Spain. Of course, a very impressive and absolutely marvelous picture on which one could make an entire lecture. The pictures of the 84 sale and the picture of the 91 sale came mostly, for sure, from Italy. From this date on, and in the 18th century, most of the Poussins who were in the trade in England in the 18th century came from France. Of course, they had been painted in Italy. This I mentioned, it's obvious, of course, but came from Italy first to France and from France to England. It's a classical way of. And one of the first pictures who entered in England, and which is a very known picture, is the very famous Tancred and Herminia from Birmingham. You have perhaps seen the picture, which was on view at the National Gallery quite recently as an exhibition of masterpieces of the Birmingham Museum, which was in the entry of the National Gallery on the left. And what was quite amusing, the picture was, well, I'm speaking not in the good order. The picture was bought in 1938 by the Barber Institute in Birmingham. And what was quite amusing in the exhibition in London was a letter of Sir Anthony Blunt, who did not accept the picture when it was bought by Birmingham. He did not think the picture was by Poussin. And so in the National Gallery exhibition, there was a letter of Poussin, a letter of Blunt of the 60s, where he apologized about these great mistakes. He was very ashamed not to have understood the picture. And in any case, the picture was bought not by Birmingham, as I said, in 1938, but far way before, by Sir James Thornhill. He bought it in Paris in 717 for £2,500 livres, which is not exactly the pounds. And Thornhill was in France in 717, and as I said before, was a great admirer of Poussin and went to see, it's a very important text, the Poussins owned by the Duke of Orleans in the collection. And so he was one of the first to know that the sacraments, the second set of the Chanteloup sacraments, were back to France and were in the collection of Duke d'Orléans. 717 is a sort of. Well, and he bought the picture from a collector whose name I have not found, but we know he's mentioned in 18th century texts under the name of Monsieur X, 3X, so I mean, and qui fut poursuivi et si vigoureusement qu'il vendit jusqu'à ses meubles. He was so bankrupt that he was obliged to sell even his furniture. And alas, this Monsieur X remains for me Monsieur X. He was obviously a financier, a bankrupt financier, and he was, of course, obliged to sell his picture. And Monsieur X, I mean, perhaps I will find it, but if someone has helped me, I'm ready to accept any suggestion. Any suggestion, of course. Thornhill was incredibly proud about this picture, and in fact there is a quite not great masterpieces here. So Thornhill showing his Poussin to his friends, which is kept in a Canadian museum. The picture is not a great. The attribution to Gavin Hamilton is not sure, and the picture is obviously not a great masterpiece, but it's quite important to see him looking at showing his picture. And as you know, one of the first real important texts by an English artist on Poussin is a long text that Sir Richardson wrote, the older, wrote in 719, that means 2 years after the acquisition of the picture, on the Birmingham picture. Well, I mean, you see, it's a quite moving also a document, nothing more than a document about the proudness of Thornhill, about the great architect, about this picture. Little thing I would like to add. It was quite clear, and that's a way of saying a word about exhibitions, that when this picture was shown in Paris in 1994, the date of this picture, which was a little bit discussed, was exactly the same as the picture of the National Gallery you showed before with the fragment, the copy of Wilton House, I mean the bacchanal that you saw a little before. And that the two pictures were exactly painted at the same moment. It was obvious at the exhibition. Everyone agreed on this point. I'm saying this not because it's important on the point of view of Poussin's chronology, but also to insist on the importance of exhibitions. I mean, I think exhibitions have made through exhibition we have made more progress as in art history, I'm sorry to say so, than through books. It's a little bit, I mean, since the war, through the exhibition, we were able to understand a lot of things that through photos, I will go back to this quite soon, you would not have been able to achieve. In any case, the date of the two pictures was absolutely the same. I cannot resist, of course, having you shown the marvelous picture in Birmingham to show you the other great subject. No, I'm sorry. The other picture painted by Poussin. On the same subject, the St. Petersburg Hermitage, Tancred in Armenia, very early, far way earlier than the Birmingham picture. One of the most tragic picture, and with this marvelous horse, white horse. As you know, there have been a little bit of resistance also for that attribution to this picture to Poussin, which is not understandable now anymore. I mean, it's such a masterpiece and such a moving picture of this marvelous subject of Tasso. I'm sorry to, my slide is not a great masterpiece, but I can assure you that the picture is a great masterpiece, which is quite obvious. It's only for pleasure that I'm showing you the picture. It comes from the collection of a great painter and dealer of the 18th century in France called Aved. And in fact, for many years, Aved, the name of Aved being translated in Russian letters was retranslated in European letters. And for instance, in Blunt's marvelous book of 1966, he's called Abel, an unknown collector. It says so. But in fact, Aved in Russian letters retranslated in English becomes something quite different. That's not a great progress in art history, but I mean, I would like to say now some words about the bacchanals, the Richelieu bacchanals, just 3 Richelieu bacchanals, and I will a little bit insist on them. You know, of course, the great masterpieces of the Triumph of Pan. As you know, Richelieu ordered from Poussin three bacchanals in 1636. They were kept in his chateau in the Poitou, in the town of Richelieu, and they were kept there together with the very famous studiolo of Isabella d'Este, Mantegna, Perugino, and so on. Great pictures which you all know, which are in the Louvre. And I mean, they were there in the same room, and a lot can be said about the 3 pictures, and a lot has been said as the occasion of the very recent exhibition in Tours about Richelieu as a collector and artistic amateur. If I'm presenting you this picture, which entered the National Gallery in 1982, coming from the Morrison picture, is because this, first thing, the pictures were kept in Richelieu until 741. We know this now precisely. They entered in England in this year, 741, where they were bought by Peter Delmay, a dealer of the time, for 252 pounds. And of course, when I say this picture, I should have immediately mentioned the pendant, which is this picture. The 2 pictures left Richelieu in 741, as I said before. The 3 pictures left Richelieu in this year and went to England, as I just said before. And what is a little bit of a surprise that I don't have the answer to this question is why the English dealers who bought these pictures in 741 in Richelieu did not buy the studiolo. The studiolo remained in Richelieu, and as you know, was seized during the French Revolution and arrived at the Louvre, where it is one of the major. Why was Mantegna and Perugino less in fashion than Poussin in the middle of the 18th century? I don't think so. I mean, it's a little of a mystery, and by chance it's not a Poussin question, so I leave this to other scholars. In any case, if I'm presenting you the 2 pictures, the National Gallery picture and the Kansas City picture, is for one simple reason, and I will a little bit insist on this. The Kansas City picture we have on the screen was refused by all scholars until 1978. Refused by all scholars who said, of course, the composition is by Poussin, but it is a copy. And this is by meaning all scholars, it's without any exception. And of course, there are many reasons who prove that the Kansas City picture is absolutely genuine and the perfect pendant of the National Gallery picture. These reasons are the following ones. The story of the two pictures is exactly the same from the Richelieu until our days. I mean, they were the same sales, they entered the same collections, they have the same frames, and they are exactly pendants. So why were the Kansas City picture thought to be a copy of the original? And this is a little thing on which I would like to insist, because I think we are now entering in matters concerning really deeply Poussin. The first reason, of course, is that the scholars who worked on the two pictures had seen the National Gallery picture, but did not go to Kansas City, or had been quickly to Kansas City, and judged the Kansas City picture using photos. And one should always see pictures and not always be confident in photos of pictures. One should see pictures. And in this case, would scholars have been to Kansas City, they would immediately have understood that the two pictures are of the same quality. So one has to go to see pictures. The second, and well, I will add, before I go to my second point, a little addition. The mode now in America, especially, but not only in America, is deaccessioning. Would this picture be considered still now as a copy after Poussin? Is it sure that the Kansas City Museum would not have deaccessioned this great masterpiece? I'm not so sure that it would not have happened. So I mean, that's the second point I would insist on, so the danger of deaccessioning. And also what I would also say is, if one would have worked a little more carefully about provenance, one would have found easily that it was not possible to give to the two pictures two different stories, by the fact that the National Gallery picture entered the National Gallery 1982, coming from the Morrison collection, and the Kansas City picture, which was bought by Kansas City in 1932, 50 years ago, have exactly the same pedigree. So a little bit of work on the provenance, and I'm insisting on provenance, which is something of which I'm very careful and aware of the importance. A little bit more work on provenance would have impeached the scholars to misunderstand the Kansas City picture. I have to say now that First Blunt, in the review of the exhibition in Rome of 1977, 1978, immediately accepted the attribution to Poussin. And I even have to say that Villiers, who was generally a little bit reluctant to change his mind about an attribution, in his second edition of his catalogue also changes his mind. So in a way, it's now a closed story. There's nothing to add to it, the story anymore. But if I've a little bit insisted on this, is because to defend a little bit what I think is the profession of a scholar. Yes, I will, of course, at this point, I will. The National Gallery owns also the third bacchanal, which is the Triumph of Silenius, which is a picture which has been, which is very much discussed in nowadays. By chance, I have in this room a defender of the picture, because we are quite alone, both of us, because we are thinking, I'm looking at him, that the picture is genuine and that it is Poussin, which is not the case of the majority of the scholars. The Silenius in this moment is very often in storage at the National Gallery. It's in this moment on view. We went to see it on last Saturday. It's hanging next, of course, to the faraway greater masterpieces, which is this picture, of course. But still, if you look at it carefully, you will see that there are passages, some parts of the picture which are very damaged, which are so beautiful that I don't think it's possible to not accept this picture as genuine. With a little question mark, I have to say, a little question mark, but I am convinced, as a person of mentioning before, that it is also by the hand of Poussin. I'm not an I mean, as you know, there are scholars who are giving too many pictures to an artist, and others who are too severe. That's true. I'm more on the severe side than on the over-attribution. So, I mean, all right. I will, of course, not at this point insist on the sacraments, of course, the great, double great acquisition of England, of the two sets of the fragment, because this was my last former lecture, and well, it will be. But I will, of course, mention a little bit more about the story of some Poussin's picture in the past. Blunt in 81, following the very impressive and marvelous work done by Wagen, the great German scholar in the 19th century about the treasures of England, private houses, thought there were 47 Poussins in England, including, I mean, I don't know if it's right to say so, but he said so, including the 3 Poussins in Dublin. He says, I myself can have not given, I don't know the number now. When my book, my catalogue raisonné, will be finished, I will try to find out if it's the number of 47 has to be increased or not. I will just open a little parenthesis, which will, I will be not too long. I can assure you that I will stop my lecture in time. We went yesterday to Woburn Abbey. Where I think I had been years ago, but I'm not even so sure. You know the place now from Birmingham. It's a marvelous place. It's a marvelous collection. Well, it's a great, great house, of course, one of the great houses of England, I think so, of England, not only for Canaletto. Woburn Abbey owns very famous pictures that we have seen quite often in exhibition, not so often, but quite often. Moses, I don't have the slide here, trembling the crown of Pharaoh, which is a famous picture of which there is a second version quite different in the Louvre. In any case, it's a very known picture and a very sure picture with a perfect provenance. But in the same castle, in the same Woburn Abbey, there is another picture which has a very poor which is very poorly accepted, and I think for reasons I mentioned before, because very few people have seen it. It's a Bathsheba. We saw one of the owners yesterday who told us that the picture was seldomly on view. It was something as in the kitchen or something. So I don't remember in which room it is. I have worked a little bit on the picture before seeing it yesterday. It has a marvelous provenance, absolutely, from the first day to day. I mean, it comes from a great Napolitan collection, Casanarte. It's mentioned in the 17th century in this collection, described with size, everything, etc. The picture is not accepted. It's accepted by no one. I can assure you that the provenance on one side, the quality of the two major figures is so obvious that it cannot not be by Poussin. The background is perhaps by Le Maire, that's possible. The condition of the picture is not perfect. It's a nude woman, of course, and in the 19th century, obviously, as it happens not only in England, but quite often in England, the fact that she was nude, there was, I don't know, she was draped for pudicity reasons, clearly, and this had been told, but the men who told the addition, the draperie de pudeur, I don't know how to say it in English, but you know enough French to be able to translate the draperie de pudeur. The restorer who told it did not well do his work, and says there is things which are not perfectly okay. But the Bathsheba is obviously all right, but one has to work on the provenance to be sure of it on one hand, and one has to look at the picture on the other hand. And I think this still is not always done by art historians. I'm a little bit sorry to insist a little bit too strongly about such things. Well, having said so, one has to speak about how the English collections of Poussin were built in a certain way, and how they can be compared to the way in which the French collections of Poussin have been built. After all, France has more or less the same amount of pictures by Poussin than England. Of course, France and England are not the only countries owning pictures by Poussin. Germany, Austria, Spain, Denmark, Russia, Italy are owning also pictures by Poussin, clearly. And I'm just presenting you very quickly the Humanitas washing at the sources of pactors, the Metropolitan picture, because it's the first Poussin who entered in an which entered in an American museum in 1871. It's the first Poussin of a public American collection. Since then, the numbers of Poussin has increased, as you know perfectly well. The French collections, of which I will be speaking very quickly, are mostly the collections of Louis XIV. He was aware of the fact that he being king of France, he had to have greatest number possible of pictures by Poussin. And he bought a lot of them, of course. I mentioned that, I will not re-mention it now, the way in which he got the picture of the Duke of Richelieu, not of the Cardinal, but of the Duke in this game, tennis game in 1665. But he bought tremendously, as anything he could buy from Poussin until a certain date, until he stopped stupidly, I can say so, in spite of being a king, he stopped to buy the pictures at a certain moment of his career. But still, the major group of pictures by Poussin of the Louvre are coming from his collection. I'll just quickly present you, I think, two pictures, the bacchanal with a guitar player, and of course, those great masterpieces, and of the Judgment of Solomon. With one exception, all the pictures bought by Louis XIV were kept during the Revolution for the Louvre. At the moment where a lot of pictures from the royal collection were sent to provincial museums, were sent a little bit everywhere, the commissaire of the French Revolution in charge of building the Louvre, the actual Louvre, decided to keep, with, I will say with one exception, all the pictures of the royal collection for Paris. And generally one says that all the Poussins bought by Louis XIV are by Poussin, that he was not wrong in his acquisition, with one exception. And this exception, I can show you it now here, it's a very damaged picture, which is now in cleaning. And this exception is not an exception, because I think now, and I think it's even quite easy to prove, that the picture is also by Poussin. So Louis XIV was never wrong in his acquisition about Poussin. He did not make a single mistake in his acquisition. I will be very quick about the French collections, because there are very few Poussins outside Paris. I'm just presenting you quickly some of major works, only to say some words. I mean, this is a very poor slate of what I see of the very famous Chantilly massacre of the innocent, one of the greatest cry of the history of picture. I don't know why my slide has this strange thing on the back. That's a mystery of slides. And in any case, the picture is the Duc d'Aumale lived in England, bought his pictures by Poussin in England, and brought them to France, where they are now, as you know, in Chantilly. Rouen, the city of birth, the region of the city of birth, owns two pictures by Poussin. This one I'm presenting you for the reason I just mentioned about the Bathsheba of Woburn, because also here the nude was at a certain point, and we know this precisely, draped. And the way in which the drapery was put away is not very, does not work. I'm fighting with the new director of the museum, de Rouen, to bring the picture to a new restoration in order to improve this nude. And there's something I'm just quickly presenting to you. The Musée de Montpellier owned the right part of the picture, which is, by the way, a picture owned by Cassiano del Pozzo, of which I spoke recently, and was able very recently to bought the fragment, which is on the left part, left part, which was owned by a collector in New York. And so they were able to buy the fragment and to bring together the two pieces of the picture, which had been divided at the end of the 18th century when the heirs of Cassiano del Pozzo sold all of their pictures, more or less. So now the two fragments are put together. Well, I mean, just quickly, the only picture owned by the city of birth of Poussin, the Coriolan, which is at Les Andelys, difficult picture to love, but a very impressive, this great frieze with this tragic story of the mother trying to avoid trahison. And I mean, quickly also, the Midas, which is in Ajaccio, coming from the Fesch collection, but strangely enough, not Fesch, who owned some very impressive Poussins, including the marvelous picture of the Wallace collection, did not know that he had a Poussin en plus, because it's in his inventory, you don't find it under the name of Poussin. So the only Poussin that Ajaccio, the city of birth of the cardinal, was the uncle of Napoleon, as you all know. The only Poussin in Ajaccio, Fesch, who was a great lover of picture, had one of the greatest collections of his time of pictures, did not know that he had once more. It's an early picture whose attribution to Poussin goes back to Roberto Longhi some years ago. Very brilliant article. And well, I mean, I just mentioned the only picture coming from the royal collections, which is not kept at the Louvre. This was sent. In fact, during the French Revolution, there was a great pressure from the region of the birth of Poussin les Anglais to get a Poussin picture. And so they fight it as much as they could. And in fact, this picture should have been sent to Rouen or to the Andelys or to one of the places next to Poussin's birthplace. And at the end, ended in Caen. It's an early picture. It's a little bit sad that the Louvre did not keep it. And recently, of course, by chance, Lyon was able to buy this picture, this late picture flight into Egypt, which is a very important recent acquisition by a French provincial museum. And as you know, of course, the Louvre bought in England, 1911, coming from the Mazarin collection, the inspiration of the poet, picture which was kept in England in the collection of Thomas Hope until 1911. And recently also, the Louvre was able to buy in France this strange picture, this very impressive picture, the Santa Francesca Romana, announcing the end of the plague. You see a very. So in a way, situation in France is very simple. Very few pictures are not coming from the royal collections. Very few pictures have been kept in France. The great collections, the three great collections of the 17th century, nothing is remaining of their collection, nothing from the Pointel collection, nothing of the Chanteloup collection, nothing of the Cerisier collection, and the Duke of Orleans, who was the other great French collection, ended, as you know very well, in England, where most of the pictures are kept till now. The situation in England is completely different. Now, I'm just have still a little thing to say about a picture which is for me a little bit of a nightmare, it's a little tragedy. It's a picture bought by the Louvre and some 15 years ago now in a sale for a very low price and accepted by scholars. And there was, for 10 years, a great process, a great trial, thank you, the great trial among the former, it was a picture we bought in an auction, and between the former owner of the picture and the museum. And at the end, we were obliged to give back the picture, which was sold, etc. Because in France, when a picture is not well catalogued in a sale, and if the Louvre or an official institution buys such a picture, by the fact that the Louvre or the official institution should know what it is, we are obliged to say it to the seller, which is something absolutely dramatic in a certain way. And this law now is very, annoying for people buying pictures in a certain way. So once they have bought a picture, hoping to know what it is, they're keeping the picture secretly for 10 years, and in order not to be obliged to give it back. I have even to confess that the Louvre is doing sometimes such things. But it's what to do. In an auction, one would think that the auctioneer and the expert of the sale, they have the responsibility of what their, and if they are wrong, they should pay, and not as this is the case in England, clearly, and the system in France is, of course, very damageable and demobilisateur, I would say, for the museums in a certain way. So we lost this picture, which is not in good condition, but which I like, of course, very much. It's Olympus de Martias. He's listening the sound of the instrument of music that played by Martias, that he had invented. So if you invent an instrument, if you play with it, you don't hear the sound of the instrument. So he asked Martias to play it in order to listen the sound of the instrument he's invented, which is a quite beautiful idea, and I would say a very much Poussinist idea. The situation in England is completely different. The situation is England. Humphrey Wine, in the catalogue I mentioned before, says that all the Poussins of the National Gallery, one of the greatest collections of Poussin in the world, were in England before 1800, with the exception, with a very impressive exception of the Annunciation, who also was in England, which was also in England 1802. That means all the Poussins of the National Gallery were in England before 1800. So, and most of these pictures which were in England before 1800 are, of course, still in England. I will quickly present you some pictures, not of the National Gallery, coming only to give you an idea of the importance of your patrimony in this field. This, of course, is Dulwich, as you know very well. I will quickly show you the two Phocions, one in Liverpool, the other one still privately owned. The Duke of Devonshire still owns this great picture, and I will now also speak of three pictures lost by England in the last years. The very impressive and very beautiful Calm of now it's a Getty, which was called for a certain time Duguay, and of course which is one of the greatest landscapes painted by Poussin, a picture which I'm sure some of you are thinking would have been should have been kept in England. And of course another picture which left England is the Los Angeles picture kept by the Getty in the Norton Simon Museum, coming from the Devonshire collection. And I'm quickly also very quickly showing you this picture, which is the crossing of the Red Sea. The pendant is at the National Gallery, as you know, the adoration of the Golden Calf, and this one ended at Melbourne. I have to say that I tried to get it for the 94-95 exhibition in Paris, but the price of the transportation and of a picture from Melbourne to Paris and the back was so impressive that my superiors did not allow me to borrow it. Yeah, I would have liked, but I would not been able also to have together the adoration of the Golden Calf of the National Gallery, because, as you know, a picture is now so fragile that it cannot travel anymore, having been attempted by some years ago in a very serious way. Well, so in a certain way, to go back to what I am saying about the patrimony of England, is that your patrimony is very fragile in a certain way, not fragile, but it's still kept in private hands. So you have to fight as much as you can to keep the picture for England. And Cambridge has done very well with the acquisition, of course, of the extreme unction that you will all see, I think, in the next days. And I mean, these battles, of course, I will always support England to try to win this battle. And I think if you can keep the immense majority of the Poussin you have, you will have done what one should do. I will be very quick now, because I see I have been a little bit too long with the first part of my lecture to speak about English art historians in a certain way. Still 10 catalogues raisonnés are in existence. 4 are written by English scholars. 2 are written by women. The first catalogue raisonné, which is a catalogue that very few people are using and very few people are using, is a very beautiful catalogue raisonné written by Lady Graham, whose portrait you have here. It's a catalogue raisonné that one should use. I will be using it, of course, and it's a very moving catalogue raisonné, existing in 2 editions, 1820 in English, 22 in French. There is a terrible review of the catalogue written by Ingres, saying the worst thing about the catalogue raisonné, because he was very anti-feminist, it's very amusing to read, and the reactions in the margin of Lady Graham catalogue. I mean, she's a very interesting. You know her far better than she's very known in England. Strangely, not known in France. And the importance of her career, her life, her trips to South America, etc., etc., is something neglected. But I mean, she's a very interesting figure. Of course, the other lady who wrote the catalogue raisonné is a Swiss lady, Doris Wilde, and 4 catalogue raisonnés, as I said before, are English. Lady Graham, Smith, marvelous, Blunt, and Wright. I will be very quick on travelers looking at Poussin, and just to present you a portrait of John Evelyn, who came to France, a very beautiful picture in a certain way, who came to France, turned to Italy, and speaks of Poussin. I spoke a little before of Richardson. Well, quite important are the English guidebooks of Rome. One should mention here quickly also Thornhill, Richardson, Reynolds, of which I spoke quite a lot about the sacraments. Hazlitt I would mention later, Ruskin and so on. Well, I mean the painters who, of course, I will not mention all the scholars alive in our days who've written on Poussin. I would just mention, because the name this year is very used name is the name of Verdi, is used quite often nowadays, but it's not Richard Verdi, but Giuseppe, who is preferred to but I mean, there are many scholars. I have it even on my piece of paper, the name of Claire Page, who I don't know, but who wrote me a note that I would like to meet her. In any case, many scholars mentioned before, Alice Waterhouse, and I would just, before ending, briefly show you two photos. You will recognize easily the two a name which is famous in your city, clearly, and his great enemy here, who died quite recently. Before ending quickly, one should ask which Poussin is beloved in England. Which Poussin is beloved in England? Is it the landscape painter? Is it the erotic painter? Is it the painter of mythologies? Is it which Poussin? And is the Poussin beloved today the same as the one which was beloved in the 19th century? All these questions, I have no answers to this. That's the reason why I say before, a book has to be written about such things. Which Poussin? And also, why certain scholars are so much interested. I mean, the pictures that Blunt loved are not the same than the ones that Maugham loved. Blunt was, of course, more interested in the intellectual Poussin. In fact, his catalogue raisonné is not chronologically oriented by subject. He had an idea of a Poussin which is not shared anymore, especially by a person sitting at the third row here, about his conception about life, about Stoicism, le peintre philosophe, which was the great idea of Blunt in a certain way. The learned artist, he was a very learned artist, there is no doubt about this. The learned artist is not exactly what is now in fashion anymore. So I mean, all these questions are quite important with a painter of the importance of Poussin. I myself will end with some very quick photos and two quotations that I will try to read my best. This is representing to you the two, the Annunciation and the Ecstasis of Santa Teresa. If I'm presenting them to you, I mentioned this before in one of the lectures, it's because the two works are completely different. But if I'm presenting them to you also, it's obviously also because Bernini, the greatest artist of his time in Rome, one of the great geniuses of the 17th century, had a complete admiration for an artist who's absolutely reverse of what he is himself. And that in fact, these two great artists were able to understand each other, in spite of the fact that I don't know exactly what Poussin thought of Bernini, but I think he looked at him quite carefully. That proves that the great artists are able to recognize themselves, each other. And I will end with some photos, only because I would like to mention two quotations, four photos of four great pictures. Well, I mean, this one because it's a great landscape, but it's also a great story. You know the pictures, the National Gallery. This one because it's a quite erotic picture, which is a completely different in style. It's the next one because it's mythology, and it's and the last one, which is a picture of the National Gallery, coming from the Le Nôtre collection, a picture which is now in view at Versailles at the Le Nôtre exhibition, and which is completely different from the other picture I showed you. Two quotations. Alas, I'm completely unable to read them well in English. I will do my best, but they're very beautiful. Reynolds, a mind thrown back 2,000 years, and as it were, naturalized in antiquity. And Hazlitt, as his touch words starts up into images, thoughts became things. Thank you so much.